Welcome everyone to our Suncoast SISMA Invasive Wildlife webinar. I'm Dr. Catherine Clements from University of Florida IFAS Extension Sarasota County, one of the co-chairs of our Suncoast SISMA, who is partnering with FWC to offer this presentation today. We will have 3 different sessions today. We are going to start out with a session on the good, the bad, and the ugly, established non-native freshwater fishes with Paul Thomas from Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission. And then at 1:30, we will have Dan Quinn from FWC talk about iguana and tegu management in Southwest Florida. And at 2:30, we're going to have Kaylee Spurgeon talk about the lionfish invasion, outreach, education, and control. So that's what we have going on today. You're welcome to come and go or stay for all 3 webinars. When you leave the webinar, you will get a link that, or you'll get a link that indicates we have an evaluation for you to take. So when you are finished with whatever sessions you attend, please give us that information so that we can evaluate our program. The Suncoast SISMA, our mission is to address the threat to native diversity within the Suncoast Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area by coordinating and increasing efforts to eliminate or reduce invasive non-native plants and animals across public and private boundaries. So throughout Florida, we have different regional SISMAs that work to educate and outreach about invasive species. We are always looking for partners and people to join our efforts. So here is our information. You can contact us through our website, and the co-chairs information should be on there. I'm one of the co-chairs, and then Ray Vincent with Manatee County is our other co-chair. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions or would like to assist in our efforts, and you can also find us on Facebook. Our first speaker, as I mentioned, is Paul Thomas with FWC. So Paul, you may go ahead and share your screen and your presentation. I'm going to let Paul introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background. Thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Thomas. I am a fisheries biologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. My career has spanned over 30 years. So I'm kind of looking at the rear end of it and getting close to retiring. Not that I really want to, because I can tell you, my career, I've been very blessed. It's been a blast. That's all I can say. A lot of people ask, well, what does a fisheries biologist do? So that's kind of what this first slide is. It's all kinds of stuff. It's field work. It's catching man-eating alligators sometimes, killer snails, diving in aquariums. Of course, most of it is, especially now, is the upper left-hand corner on the phone or in front of the computer for most of the time. So I got my degree at Michigan State University, and I wanted to either work up there or down here in Florida. And Florida offered me a position first. And I'm so glad they did, because quite frankly, I don't do cold well, so I would be a frozen lump of nothing if I was still in the home state. A lot of people ask me, how did I get started in this? What was the motivation I had for becoming a fisheries biologist? Well, a lot of it was, oh my God, I like to fish. More importantly, I like my family to fish. I pass that passion and love for fish and fishing to the next generations. So, and I think I've been at least halfway successful at that. So, oh my God, that sounds bad. Can you hear that or not? So my title for this presentation, which is on non-native invasive fishes, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we got to do some definitions first. So non-native species definition is a critter living outside captivity that did not historically occur in Florida. So my question would be, if I can hear you guys, give me an example of a non-native species. Tegus, iguanas, tilapia.
Bullseye Snakehead.
How about snowbirds? That's my favorite non-native right there. All right. How about an invasive species? Well, we define that as a non-native critter that has spread into natural areas and preys upon or competes with native species. All right. A good example of a invasive non-native would be what? Pythons, let's say. Or again, what we're going to talk about later, tegus, lionfish. Or again, how about snowbirds? They spread into our natural areas and they compete with us, natives or semi-natives. All right, and last but not least, how about an exotic? What's an exotic? Again, snowbirds. Thankfully, I know those people, so they allowed me to use this picture, but those are definitely some of the most exotic snowbirds I've ever met. All right, let's go on to fish. The goods, the bads, and the uglies. All right, if you look at this, we've got, oh gosh, over 30 species of fish that are established and reproducing here in freshwater in Florida. So I have what, an hour? I guess we better get going. We're not going to talk about all of them. But let's talk about how those fish got here. What were the agents of introduction? And if any of you are over the age of 40, you may remember what that little cartoon reference is. If not, I'm sorry you don't. So, aquarium dumping is one of the biggest agents of introduction for non-native fish. It is illegal for you to dump your aquarium fish into the wild in Florida. If we catch you, it's going to be at least a $500 fine. We also have what we call food fish release, where we have fish farms, people raising fish like, say, tilapia for food. And some of those fish have gotten loose over the years. Pond flooding. Got somebody who's got a koi pond? Unfortunately, most waters in Florida are not isolated. At some point in time, every piece of water here is going to be connected to something else, whether it's a drainage ditch, culvert pipe, or surface flooding, because when we get a lot of rain, things get connected. We also have legal introductions, which means that my agency, my division, we have introduced a couple of non-native fish on purpose, and we'll talk about those in just a few minutes. And of course, here's the biggest agent of introduction: hurricanes, tropical storms. Like I said, at some point in time, all of our waters get connected. So if you had a koi pond in your backyard, we get a hurricane, guess what? Your koi are probably going to be gone. And they're going to be out swimming in a local lake, river, or stream nearby. All right, so what's the harm of a non-native fish? Anything? Well, sometimes it can alter the natural energy flow of an ecosystem. That's probably the biggest problem that we see. Sometimes they can compete or hybridize with our native fishes. We're not real happy about that. Sometimes they can be harmful to us. They can be disease or parasite vectors. Again, that goes into altering natural energy flow. And sometimes they just exist semi-peacefully. We can't really find a bad thing about them. They're just there. They just take up a niche that wasn't occupied before. All right, let's move on here. Maybe. Uh-oh. All right, slides are stuck. Help. What causes that? I have the spinning circle of doom just sitting there. Awesome. Oh, wait. Oh my gosh, now I just went through a whole bunch of stuff. All right, let's talk about the good fishes. These are the ones that, yeah, we really don't see any harm with these guys. All right, first and foremost, the butterfly peacock bass. It was a legal introduction by our division. FWC back in the 80s, 1984. It's a native predator from South America, and we introduced it into the canals systems down in the Miami area to act as a predator partner, if you will, with our #1 sport fish in the state of Florida, which is the largemouth bass. Those canal systems down there are pretty unique. If you've never been there, it's an interesting trip. The canals were dug right into the lime rock. They have the water stays around 72 degrees or warmer in the summertime, but it never really gets below that. So it truly is a tropical environment, which is why we decided to use the butterfly peacock bass, because it's a truly tropical fish. In other words, if somebody tried to introduce those up, say here, in my area in Lakeland, Central Florida, they would probably live through the summer, but they wouldn't make it through a winter because the water gets too cold. All right, so the range can't really expand much. It's an $8 million a year sport fishery down in that Miami area. That was another thing we were trying to do, was to create a sport fishery. And it worked out really, really well. They're a very popular fish. We have people that come from all over the world that want to go down to Miami just to catch those. So that's one of our good guys. Another one of our good guys, at least most of the time, is the triploid grass carp. This is a non-native fish from Asia, and we have used it as a biocontrol agent for aquatic plants since the early 1980s. Now, the fish that we allow to be used here in Florida for that is what we call a triploid grass carp, because they are genetically altered in a hatchery. They have 3 sets of chromosomes instead of 2, which means they're a grass carp in every sense of the word, but they can't reproduce. They still can go through the spawning ritual. I mean, they, males find females, they put on very white music, and, they do all the things that they're supposed to do, but there's no survivability of the eggs. They get big. They get up to 75 pounds, 80 pounds here in the wild. And under the right conditions, they do a great job for us in controlling some nuisance aquatic plants. All right, the Mayan Cichlid, or as the fishermen call it, it's the Atomic Brim. We never knew anything about this guy until a local newspaper published an article about Atomic Brim. And I happen to know the writer, so I called him up and I'm like, what in the heck are you talking about? He says, I don't know, that's just what they call him. I said, send me a picture, please. So he did. I went, oh, it's a Mayan Cichlid. These got introduced again in the early 80s down in South Florida. The range has expanded across the peninsula from the Miami area where they first started all the way over to the Gulf Coast, and they are found as far north as Central Florida, right here in Polk County. Again, they don't seem to compete with our natives. They're a lot of fun to catch. They don't get big. I mean, a 12-inch Mayan Cichlid would be huge, but they're a lot of fun to catch, and they're also really good to eat. So they're real popular with our anglers. And because they're a non-native, we don't have a size limit, we don't have a bag limit. You can catch and keep as many as you want. All right, let's move on to the bad guys.
Paul.
All right. Yes.
Hey, Paul, I just want to mention, I think we're hearing your notifications. So if you have email or something open in the background and you can close it, that would be great. We're hearing like the sounds of the wild behind you every once in a while.
Okay, I don't have anything open.
Okay.
I think that's built into the PowerPoint. It's doing the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Soundtrack. Yes.
Yeah.
There were
Okay.
sound effects in there. That's probably what you heard. That was me trying to be clever.
All right, go ahead. It's just hard to hear when it goes off.
Yeah, or as they call them here in Central Florida, the Nile perch. All right. This, unfortunately, was a purposeful introduction to Central Florida by the old Game and Fish Commission, my old agency. Back in the early 60s, late 50s, we had 3 aquatic plants that just took over our waterways: hydrilla, water lettuce, and water hyacinth. And we were trying to find, you know, all sorts of control methods. We tried insects, herbicides, harvesting. Herbicide is still the #1 tool, but back then there was a book that came out, Silent Spring, about the dangers of herbicides. And so our cutting edge scientists back in the day thought, well, if we can get a fish that's going to eat plants, we can introduce the fish, it'll take care of the plants, and maybe it'll be a fish that people will like to catch, and everything will be, you know, a rose garden. And it sounds stupid now, but back then, that was cutting edge biology. So we sent the team up to Auburn University, where they've been doing some experiments on plant-eating fish. And we brought back 3,000 juvenile, what we thought were another form of tilapia, but they turned out to be blue tilapia, which, guess what? They don't eat plants. They sometimes will skim filamentous algae off of, say, rocks, logs, and docks. But for the most part, they're a filter feeder. They filter invertebrates and planktonic algae out of the water column. They pick up mouthfuls of muck and filter organic material out of that. But they don't eat plants, and they absolutely suck as a control engine. So we brought them back here in 1961. There was a pit, phosphate pit, just south of Plant City, where we had some people doing experiments, and the outdoor media at the time got a hold of the story and advertised that we were working on this fish. And so we had some anglers that snuck into those ponds, stole them, and started distributing them amongst lakes. And of course, as we found out, they suck as plant control. And now they're here, and they're well established, and they're everywhere. They compete for spawning space with our native sport fish like largemouth bass and bluegills. They're a mouth brooder, so there's not really anything that preys on the larval fish because the parents will keep them in their mouth until they're free swimming and they're able to survive on their own. So the survivability of that fish is much higher than any other natives. We've achieved a balance, if you will, in most systems, but goodness sake, if there was a way to get rid of this fish forever, we would do it. But unfortunately, there's not. Again, it's tilapia is kind of the darling of the fish world anymore. I mean, tilapia is on just about every menu you can see. So we do encourage anglers, if they want to go out and catch them, they can. Now, in Central Florida, they're called Nile perch, but a Nile perch is a totally different fish. That's this guy. The true Nile perch is a large relative of the snook. It's found in fresh water in lakes in Africa. I'm really glad it's not here, because if this guy was introduced to Florida, we would not have bass fishing. We would not have much in the way of natives, because these guys get big, as you can see, and they're a voracious predator. So they are a listed species for Florida. You can't possess them at all here. All right, the sailfin suckermouth armored catfish. These are just about everywhere too. When I moved here in the late 80s, you only found them pretty much in the Hillsborough River, the bypass canal of the Hillsborough River, over there in Hillsborough County. Since then, their range has expanded eastward across the state, south across the entire peninsula, and as far north as Gainesville. And they came from the aquarium trade. If you've ever set up an aquarium for home, for yourself or your kids, you go to a pet store, one of the things they want to sell you is usually what they call an algae eater. So a little armored catfish. It's this guy. Out in the wild, these guys get pretty big. They get up to about 4 pounds, 16, 18 inches, and they're an air breather, so they can survive in conditions that a native fish can't. They are what we call a cavity nester. They dig a burrow for spawning. Sometimes we see what we've come across with their numbers as they've gone up is we do see erosion in stream banks and river banks, and occasionally in lakes and ponds. So even though they've been here since the 50s, there's still a lot we don't know about this fish as far as, you know, what it does in the ecosystem, what its role is. The young are preyed upon heavily by predaceous fish like largemouth bass or in river systems and snook. But once they get to be adults, not much of anything touches them except for alligators, ospreys, eagles, and herons. All right, another little catfish that you can find in the pet stores. This is not the algae eater, but this is one that they'll also want to sell you because it's going to be the tank cleaner. These guys were discovered in Florida over in Indian River Lagoon in the mid-90s, 95. Some of our wildlife officers actually found some commercial fishermen had introduced them from Trinidad. That's where it's native to. And it's the national dish of Trinidad. And so certain times of the year, it's highly sought after as a food fish. And apparently people were just tired of buying dead ones in the fish market. So they thought, you know what, we're going to create our own haplopopulations. Again, not greatly understood as far as what its role is. It doesn't seem to be that bad, but you know, it does compete with our some of our native catfish and some of the smaller fishes for food. It digs in the bottom for invertebrates and organic material. They are eaten by just about everything that can eat fish, though. So they have become another food source or a prey item for largemouth bass and snook and gators and turtles and wading birds. All right, my personal favorite, the walking catfish. These started showing up in the late 60s. I found out about them as a kid in that little publication you see up at the top, the Weekly Reader. Long before we had the internet, this was a little publication that was put out to elementary schools, and it was all about, you know, science and history and that kind of thing. And it was very topical for its time. And they had an article in the one about walking catfish, and I was really intrigued by that. I thought that was so cool that there was a fish, you know, that could get out and walk. They were going to be the golden goose, as I've said there on the slide, of the aquarium trade, because my goodness, who couldn't market a fish that you could walk? I mean, I remember back in the back of the old Marvel comic books, there were ads for all kinds of critters you could buy from Florida, including walking catfish, and there was an ad that had a picture of a kid walking one on a leash. So the tropical fish farmers were going to be like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. So they started raising them by the thousands. The only problem is they forgot that they can walk. So when it came time to harvest those ponds, those first ponds, the fish weren't there. They'd gotten up and left. They used to be very, very competitive with our native fish, but over the years, their numbers have really gone down quite a bit, and they're just kind of at a status quo, kind of a low-level population that we see throughout central and southern Florida. Do they walk? Yes, they do. They are an air breather. Their swim bladder is actually a rudimentary lung. So as long as their skin stays wet, they can get out and they can go a long ways. They lock their pectoral fins, the fins on the side, in place, and they do kind of this little military crawl. So, and because I'm the neighborhood biologist here in my neighborhood, I've had plenty of calls over the years to remove walking catfish from all kinds of places, lanais, bathrooms, garages, carports. They show up all over the place. All right, let's move on. Talk about the ugly for a minute. All right, first and foremost, the piranha. It actually says, first of all, if you don't know this, the Fish and Wildlife Commission is one of the few constitutionally created fish and wildlife agencies in the state of Florida. And what that means is in the state of Florida's Constitution, it outlines that thou shalt have a Fish and Wildlife Agency. In this case, it's us, FWC. And there's a whole list of rules and things that we're supposed to follow as an agency. For my division, for the Division of Freshwater Fisheries, one of the #1 rules is nobody can own a piranha as a pet or for any other reason here in Florida. And the reason for that was back in the 30s when they were filming some of the Tarzan movies, they used piranha in one of the movies. Now, piranha are native to South America and not native to Africa, which is where Tarzan was supposed to be. So that never quite made sense, but it was a good movie gimmick at the time. And the Board of Tourism was really afraid that those fish were going to get loose and we would have, bloodthirsty killer piranhas all over the state. So up until 2009, we had never seen a piranha in the wild. Never. There was a pond down in the West Palm Beach area where it was a 5-acre retention pond in the neighborhood, and they found 5 live piranhas. So we had to go in, and again, this is actually in the Constitution, in our bylaws. If piranha are ever found in the wild, we have to go kill everything in that system to ensure that those piranha are not going to spread. All right. Now, are piranha a real bad guy in their native range? No, they're not. Are they as bloodthirsty as you see in the movies? No, they're not. It's actually pretty safe to swim with them. I'd rather swim with them than some other fish. That pond in West Palm Beach was a big lesson for our division in terms of public relations and how to handle a situation like that. More importantly, how not to handle it, because I'll get to this in a minute, but everything that could go wrong for us as a division did. All right, last but not least, my favorite non-native right here, the snakehead. How many of you out there are fans of like bad B-grade movies? I am. If you've never seen this movie, I urge you to go out and find it. It is absolutely horrible and funny at the same time. Starring Bruce Boxleitner, if you remember him, Scarecrow and Mrs. King, and Carol Alt, who made her career in 80s music videos, like White Snake videos. Carol Alt is the biologist in the movie, and God bless her, she can't act. She had just gotten Botox apparently, so you can barely understand what she's saying. Her lips are so swollen. And they have one of the first CGI critters ever created, this giant mutant snakehead. It's absolutely wonderful and horrible at the same time. So where are snakeheads in Florida? We have what's called the Bullseye Snakehead, which is a tropical fish, truly tropical fish, one of the 29 species of snakehead. And when I say truly tropical, that means that its range can't expand too far. It was first documented in the fall of 2000 down in the canals, where we find the peacock bass, as a matter of fact. And it's become a very popular sport fish. They are fun to catch. They're strong, they're fast, they're fun, and I can attest to this, if you like to eat fish, they're also pretty darn tasty. So we now have a snakehead fishery down there in the Miami area. Now, there was another species, the northern snakehead, which hit the news a few years ago. It was found in the Potomac River, and it is well established there. It is a temperate fish, meaning it evolved in an area that had basically 4 seasons. So it's very cold tolerant, unlike the bullseye. We also have a native fish called a bowfin, or a mudfish, that gets mistaken for snakeheads quite a bit. On the Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, there's 3 very popular fishing shows: River Monsters, The Fish there's a fish warrior, and a fish master or something like that. All three of them have done an episode though on snakeheads, and every time that episode airs, our phones get lit up because people are catching the common bowfin or mudfish, and because they saw it on TV, that mudfish is now a snakehead. They look similar, right here, but they're not the same fish. They both have a rounded caudal fin. They're both air breathers. In those TV shows, they say that snakeheads can walk on land. They cannot do that. Even though they're air breathers, they don't really have the means, like a walking catfish, any kind of locomotion. They can slither and flip and flop outside of water for quite a long time, as long as their skin stays wet. But they can't walk. And if you look at the two of them side by side there, the big difference in telling them apart is, number one, the head shape. On a bowfin, it looks like a torpedo. Snakehead, well, yeah, it looks like a snake's head. They both have a long, continuous dorsal fin and that rounded caudal fin, but the snakehead has a long and continuous anal fin, the fin underneath, and the bowfin does not. That's how you get to tell them apart. And up until just a few weeks ago, the only place we had ever documented snakeheads was down in those canals in Miami. Our office in Lakeland got a call from a credible angler who said he was catching snakeheads in a pond down around Sarasota. So we went down just a couple of weeks ago to look for them, and yep, they're there. So they're now in our region and they're reproducing. As you can see, that's an adult on the left, and that is about a 2-month-old snakehead in my hand on the right. So we're kind of circling the wagons right now, trying to figure out what our next move is going to be. So far, we haven't found them outside of this one pond. And we're going to go down and document just how many are there and try and expand and see if they've moved into other waters. And we'll make that decision on what we're going to have to do. If they're just in that one pond, we'll probably end up killing that pond out and restocking it. Which brings me to the PR nightmare I was talking about with the piranha. Okay. So first of all, what can we do about non-native fishes? All right, we had, I should say, a non-native fisheries laboratory down in Boca. The personnel are still there, but the facility itself was a building that we were leasing from a university who ended up selling the property and the facility to the state of Florida so that they could put another toll road through. Yay. But, so what can we do about these non-natives? Well, number one, our long-term goal would be eliminate illegally introduced fish when possible, like the possibility of the snakeheads here in Southwest Florida. Biggest thing is education and outreach, and that's just getting the message out to people that, okay, you want a koi pond, you want to have an aquarium, that's great. Please do not release those fish because they can survive and they can cause some problems. All right. The other thing, with so many of them already established here, is, quote unquote, find a use for it. In the case of snakeheads, they're very popular sport fish now down in the Miami area, and we kind of market that. Tilapia are they're probably the biggest nuisance fish we have, but they also support a small but thriving freshwater commercial fishery. We have people here in Polk County and some other counties in Central Florida that we allow to commercial fish for these on a large scale. And anybody with a cast net that wants to become a commercial fisherman, that they can catch and keep and sell those fish to. So this is going to be, well, not my closing question, but going back to the PR nightmare with the piranha. So we had to go in, again, by law, we had to go in and kill that 5-acre pond out in this apartment complex. which was very popular as a fishing spot with the kids that lived there. We did not do a good job of consulting our stakeholders and letting people know what we were going to do and get their input. The lesson learned, we went in, we killed out the pond, horrified all the residents because we basically killed all the fish there, and then went back and restocked it. As I said, the big lesson we did learn out of that is we evolved as a division on how to effectively deal with anglers and our stakeholders. So we don't make decisions like that in a vacuum anymore. That's what we used to do. Now we go out, we seek the input of our communities and let them know, okay, these are our options, you know, and we get their input. And it's a longer decision-making process that way, but it's ultimately more effective for our stakeholders and for the environment. And with that, I'm going to get off my soapbox. I'm just going to ask you a question. What's worse, bad fish or bad fish movies? For me, it's bad fish because I love bad fish movies. That's another one. If you've never seen Frankenfish, go out and find it.